Hey, this is Sujit Sumitran again with yet another session from Cal Media on demystifying bread. And in today's session, we will look at the difference between homemade bread that's made with commercial yeast and sourdough bread. So, homemade bread made with commercial yeast can be done by using three of the commonly available yeasts that you can buy. There's baker's yeast, there's active dry yeast, and there's instant yeast. All of these will give you more or less similar results. And most of them will give you results from flour to bread in about 4 hours. Now, if at all you want to use commercial yeast, my strong recommendation would be that you keep the amount of yeast to the bare minimum and try and make sure that the total process from flour to bread is about 8 to 10 hours. Coming to sourdough breads, as I've mentioned in one of the earlier sessions, has essentially just three components. There's flour, there's water, there's salt. And of course, there is a culture of flour and water, which is normally called the starter. Now, what is a starter? A starter is really an ecosystem that has good bacteria, which is called lactobacillus, almost the same like what's available in dahi, and some strain of wild yeast. And together, they are used to ferment the flour, water, and salt, and that's how you get bread. Typically, sourdough breads would take around 8 hours, that's the minimum time, for it to be ready. But what's recommended is a slow ferment time of at least about 15 to 18 hours. Okay, so how does sourdough bread connect with the gluten sensitivity and the gluten intolerance issues? Sourdough bread, firstly, follows, because it's 100% natural, goes through a very slow fermentation process. And that essentially means that a lot of the proteins and the gluten which is present in the dough is broken down considerably before we ingest it. So our bodies have to work less in order to break them down and to absorb them, number one. Number two, sourdough bread also, which is not connected with gluten insensitivity, but sourdough bread has great keeping qualities. The bread is naturally acidic thanks to the lactobacillus which is present, and therefore you can just wrap a loaf of bread and keep it at room temperature for as much as 4 days and nothing goes bad with it, despite the fact that there are no preservatives of any sort that's put into it. Yeah. So net, any bread which has been slow fermented, and ideally one which has a combination of bacteria and wild yeast, is the kind of bread that you should be eating.